taking desperate measures to try and control the devastating flooding that's plagued the country for months now. The biggest concern right now is Pakistan's largest lake, Lake Mancha, located in the hard-hit Sindh province. The relentless rain and flooding has pushed up its levels, and the lake breached Tuesday, either by man or by nature, and that has caused more flooding downstream. The scope of the disaster is astounding. A third of the country currently underwater, more than 1,300 lives lost. Much of that farmland that sustains Pakistan's economy drowning under the floodwater, Nakaran reports. But a note, there are disturbing images in this report.
A metal box is pulled through the floodwaters. "What's in the box?" asks the bystander. "A dead body," replies a man. They open the lid and show the body of a man crammed in. The family doesn't have money for a funeral, he explains. There is no place to bury the dead. That is how bad the situation is. They continue to haul the makeshift coffin through the brown, murky water, searching for higher ground to bury the corpse.
Lord God.
In another district, a group of villagers drag a makeshift raft with another man's body through the floodwaters. "We came across an official with a tractor," says a man looking distressed. "We requested help to transport the body, but he denied. There is no ambulance, no support by anyone." As Pakistan's catastrophic floods continue to inundate one-third of the country, the province of Sindh in the country's southeast is now bearing much of the brunt of this climate change-induced disaster. With the water unable to drain away, there is nowhere to give the dead a dignified burial. Instead, these villagers hold a funeral procession for their relative in the very waters that claimed his life. Pakistan's unprecedented monsoonal rains that have been falling since June have affected at least 33 million people across the country. That's 15% of the population. Millions have been displaced, having lost their homes and crops in the floodwaters.
Millions.
And the government and aid agencies are struggling to provide enough food, medical care and shelter to those who've lost everything.
My God.
The ferocity of the flash floods has been the biggest killer. More than 1,300 people have died, one-third of them children, including a 3-day-old baby girl whose family tried to escape their home as the water almost reached the ceiling.
Wow.
The wife had the baby in her hands, and just at the end, she couldn't hold it because the water was too strong, and the baby swept away. They found the baby, but unfortunately, the baby died.
For the people living near Lake Mancha, Pakistan's largest freshwater lake, a looming disaster supposedly averted has come at a very high price. Officials were forced to breach it to reduce dangerously high water levels, but tens of thousands of villagers downstream have now been left homeless, and further flooding is still expected. "It destroyed our crops and houses. No one informed us it was happening. No one warned us," explained this farmer, tending to his cattle, barely keeping their heads above water. "The village is submerged. There is no way to get to our village," says this man. "Some families are now stranded. We appeal to the government to send rescue teams and help these people." A plea to an already overstretched government grappling to deal with this unprecedented calamity. Anna Corrin, CNN, Hong Kong.
Well, for those who are able to flee to dry land, conditions aren't much better. Suzanne George from the Washington Post takes us to a makeshift camp where the smallest victims are suffering the most.
We're in Gluobal. This is one of the largest makeshift camps outside of Seven in Sindh province. As you can see, people here are living in tents that they've built for themselves out of plastic tarps and sticks from nearby trees. Some people don't even have coverings over their heads. When we first arrived, families rushed towards us holding their children that they said are getting sicker by the day because of the lack of sanitation at this camp and because humanitarian aid or government assistance has not yet reached people here. There are hundreds of tents and thousands of people, many of them children. This crisis has been particularly hard on children here in Sindh province. Many of these people have fled from incredibly poor rural villages, and their children were already malnourished before the floodwaters hit. When people arrived to camps like this with even less food to eat, their children's health deteriorated. We spoke to a pregnant woman at this camp. She's in her 8th month of pregnancy and said she can't imagine delivering a child into conditions like this. She said that there isn't even clean water to drink. You need to walk 2 hours to the nearest town in order to get that water, and so she's been forced to drink from the floodwaters, and it's been making her and her children sick. Floodwaters are continuing to rise in this area, cutting off roads leading in and out of the main town near here, and as that continues, it's going to be even more difficult for aid agencies and the government to get the help that people here need to them.
Well, let's bring in CNN meteorologist Chad Myers with a closer look at the weather situation. And Chad, Pakistan's largest lake burst its banks, making the flooding situation worse. What's the latest?
You know, there was a levee that was holding the water back from the area you're seeing here. But that levee was also creating the very high water levels in the lake, and they feared that it could break at any time. So here's what we have. Almost 3 times the normal precipitation across the entire country. Now, some spots are 600%, 6-7 times more. And some of these spots here down across the south. But the lake, right, being that they're almost in the center of the country. Now, this is the breadbasket of Pakistan. This is where things are grown. This is last year, a very good crop. Very green across here. Now it's computer enhanced, but you get the idea. This is where the crops were growing and would have been growing right now, except there's water in the way. Now you have to understand that from this side of the water to this side of the water, there's only about a 20-meter difference in the bottom of the river. This is a very flat area. So that's the reason why so much has flooded, because even though it's only a meter deep, it's wide as this delta or this road all the way down across parts of Pakistan. This is what the lake looked like. Now we're going to move you ahead till it's filling up. Notice how it's filling up, because the bottom side here is getting farther and farther away from the middle. But for now, all of a sudden, this was the levee holding the water back from the areas that we were just showing you. The levee here, moving you ahead one more time, water coming up, but all of a sudden, as the water came up, what was fertile farm fields right here got completely devastated with the water, just completely moved into that area. And those are the people that were complaining, or saying at least, that no one told us. Well, there really wasn't that much of a communication thing there, because this is a very large area. You have to talk to an awful lot of people, word of mouth, really, from when you're going to actually see that barrier or that levee until where you don't see the levee at all. Now, there's not much more rain coming. That's good news. Maybe up to the north a little bit, up into the areas where we talked about the glaciers kind of melting up here. But the flooding is right through this area here, and there's no expected rainfall over the next 5 days, Linda.
All right. Chad Myers, I appreciate that update. Thanks so much for that explanation. We are going to stay on this story. I want to bring in Pakistan's Planning Minister, Assan Iqbal, who is also the second in command behind the Prime Minister of the National Flood Response Coordination Center. So he's just the man we should be speaking to today. He joins us live from the capital, Islamabad. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
So you are second in command of the National Flood Response Coordination. Given that Pakistan is a third of the country now underwater, the problem just seems overwhelming.
Well, right now, I think Pakistan is facing one of the worst climate change disasters, which is a big human tragedy for us, because more than 33 million people are displaced. Millions are without any shelter in open skies, because the scale of the tragedy is so big that despite our full mobilization of resources, of the government, of the armed forces, we are still unable to reach out to many people. And this is something that I think international community has to realize, that Pakistan is suffering for a crisis which is not one of its own making. We are less than 1% contributors to the global warming, but we are the 7th most vulnerable country to climate change. And today, as a result, we have experienced a monsoon that has brought devastation to millions of people, poor families who have lost everything, not just the infrastructure that can be rebuilt, but they have lost their livelihoods, they have lost their hopes. And I think this is a big challenge which we all have to work together to bring these people back into life.
We have been reporting that 1,300 people have been killed in the floods, but given, Minister, that you say that you have been unable to reach so many people, 33 million people that are affected by this, do you fear that the death toll will rise?
Definitely, there are still many areas which are inundated. We are reaching out to all those areas, and every day we do get new reports of more deaths. I think this figure could rise. Similarly, our initial estimates were that the damage is somewhere over $10 billion, but we can now very easily say that now the new estimates that are coming in will take this damage much over $15 billion to our economy, to our infrastructure, to the livelihoods of the people. We are still in the relief and rescue phase. And very soon as we have the water recede, we will have to go into rehabilitation phase where we will be facing the daunting task of rehabilitating these 33 million people who have lost their crops, who have lost their livestock, who have lost their businesses. So they have lost all their life savings and they have to rebuild their lives now.
So the monsoon rains and obviously the melting glaciers in the northern mountains contributed to these devastating floods. But then yesterday we saw Pakistan's largest lake breach its banks. What can you tell us about the situation there as authorities try to reduce the rising water levels? And do you know what contributed to that lake breaching its banks?
Well, as the water is receding towards south, we are having more water in the lake, which is in the south part of Pakistan. This monsoon was very typical because historically monsoons have brought rainfalls in the northern parts of Pakistan. And our infrastructure has been very much used to facing river-based flooding. But this time, this rainfall for consecutive 3 months took place in those areas which received more than 700% rainfall than their last 30 to 40 years average. These areas used to receive very low or moderate rainfall, and all of a sudden, hell broke on them with very heavy rain that lasted for almost 3 months, and it turned entire districts in Sindh and Balochistan province, south of Punjab, south of KP, into big, large ocean. And still, there are hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of area where you can only see water, and it is very difficult to say whether this is landmass or this is part of some ocean or sea.
Wow. As we heard from one of our reporters from, I think, the Washington Post earlier, the impact you're seeing on children, quite significant, but also on pregnant women. I understand more than 100,000 pregnant women have been displaced. Only 900 so far have made it to a relief camp. That's according to government data. These are pretty harrowing conditions. What do you think they need most right now?
I think we have an emergency as far as the health care is concerned. Not only there is an estimate about 650,000 women who have to deliver babies. We are setting up mobile maternity hospitals for them. We need lots of more mobile hospitals. There is now also this fear that as soon as this first phase over, we will face a very serious challenge to face cholera, malaria, dengue fever, hepatitis, all the waterborne diseases, and we need many water desalination plants, clean water plants, so that people can be saved from outbreak of all these waterborne diseases. So there is this health emergency on which we are working, trying to cover our people as much as we can.
Pakistan's Planning Minister Assan Iqbal, we really appreciate your time today. We wish you all the very best, and I hope to speak to you again soon because it is important to.
My final word is
That's unbelievable to see how many people has been affected. 33 million people that's been affected directly. 6.6 million have been severely impacted. The way that I understood the ratings was well over 1 million structures was completely destroyed. And what this guy is trying to tell everybody, that there will be a looming catastrophe because of this catastrophe, pertaining to people getting sick and dying with all other types of known waterborne carrying diseases. So, my God, I mean, no matter what conditions that you may be going through right here in America, which I realize some people has gone through some extreme conditions just within the past 5 years, especially since COVID hit. But please, please pray for these poor people and realize that even though we may have went through what we have went through in various areas, regardless whether it was fires or flooding or droughts or whatever, you ain't going to get much any worse than this right here as far as the long-term suffering, in addition to the 1,300 that they know that is and has become deceased. I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis that will exceed that over in Yemen probably 10 to 1, if that can ever even be imaginable, because of the people, because of the horrendousness of it being so big. I haven't heard how many square miles that it's actually covered pertaining to this, but it has to be a very, very large amount. Probably, I'm going to estimate probably the size of Texas. You're talking about 33 million people that's been affected, and 6.6 has been severely affected or impacted. So yes, this is a horror story in the making. Extremely, extremely sad. And once more, what did Jesus say? Jesus said that in the last days that we would see signs up in the heaven, signs upon the earth, such as mankind has never ever seen before, and that there would be great distress among the nations, that there would be events that would be characterized as being the great sorrows of humanity, pertaining to all the unbelievers and all the wickedness and all the sinfulness here upon to the planet. That basically this is, I've used the expression as a child throwing a tantrum because of what we're doing to Mother Nature as far as global warming. But I would even go so far as using the terminology that it's as if somebody has gotten sick and throwed up. They have suddenly throwed up because of the sorrows, because of the sin. And they throwed up water instead of vomit, but just using that as an analogy towards Mother Nature in and of itself, basically throwing a tantrum because we did not listen to the experts. We did not listen to the professional people going back 30 plus years ago, that now it's now caught up with all of us. And to rearrange this and turn this around, it's going to take a master mining global ondoings that the super nations are going to have to all pull together towards, if we're going to reverse this type of tragedy that is happening now all over the world. I mean, it's bad enough for us to see what happened in Dallas. It's bad enough for us to see what happened in Jackson, Mississippi. It's bad enough to see what happened recently in the northern part of Georgia. It's bad enough to see what happened recently in St. Louis and West St. Louis and southern Illinois got flooded. Southeastern Kentucky got flooded. Other areas has been inundated by this type of deluging water experience, as well as what happened last year, almost to the date, a little over a year now, towards what happened to a little town in Waverly, Tennessee, in Humphreys County, Middle Tennessee. I mean, the signs is there of doing an observatory of what is happening all over the world. And the only way that I can try to characterize it in a way that maybe some people can actually understand it is to characterize it in the form of either a child throwing a tantrum or somebody getting sick and throwing up. And of course, whenever you throw up, you don't throw up just little particles of debris in your stomach. You basically unload the whole thing at one time. And that's what we're seeing because of the instability in our atmosphere right now. And they're only going to get worse. That's the bad thing about it is it's only going to get worse if we don't change it, if we don't listen to the experts, if we don't go back to the altar, like it talks about there in the first part of Revelations, to do thy first works over again. If we don't abide by the warnings that we're obviously being inundated with, it's only going to get worse. So sad, but so true.
My final word is to the international community. Climate change is not a fiction. It is here. Our people, poor people, are paying the price for global warming. Please take it seriously.
And Pakistan, of course, one of the lowest contributors to that climate crisis. I appreciate your time and thanks for sharing that important message. We wish you the best. With soaring energy costs hitting many in Britain hard, Prime Minister Liz Truss says she gets it. She does have a plan to help the people. Plus,
Go! No panic, no panic!
foreign fighters on the front lines with Ukrainian troops here in their words why they're stepping into the fight against Russia.
I don't know why my CNN channel is so low. It's basically only that way on CNN.
By nearly 3 million votes, but lost the Electoral College? No, I was not happy. Did I even for a nanosecond think I'm going to claim victory and try to get the Democrats to refuse to certify the election? No.
Obviously, some are going to say, you know, she's waiting in here. She was asking a question posed by a journalist. But as somebody who's written extensively about the 2016 election, what will be the impact of those comments? I mean, is she right to speak out so forcefully?
Well, if you think about it, Trump didn't even accept the results of the 2016 election. He was still complaining and spreading conspiracy theories about people who supposedly voted illegally, and he was claiming incorrectly that he was the actual winner of the popular vote when we all know he wasn't. So this is really kind of come full circle now here, and Hillary Clinton is not incorrect at all when she points out that the conspiracy has grown and really metastasized to such a degree that it makes what Trump did in 2016 almost look quaint. I mean, I never expected following the 2020 election that so many mainstream Republicans would refuse to accept the results and go along with Trump, even if it's just kind of silently, tacitly acknowledging this falsehood that there was widespread voter fraud. I mean, that's a whole different Republican Party.
And that's the reason why it is so critical, regardless whether it's Alex Jones, regardless whether it's whoever, especially the President of the United States, or other big media complexes in other parts of the world, it is so essential that what they say is accurate to the letterhead pertaining to what they're talking about. Because if it's not, you can literally mislead, misguide, misrepresent a whole group of people into a stance that will be devastating for your country and be devastating for that group of people if they act upon one individual in being a rebel riser and basically lying to their people. And it don't matter if it's American people, it don't matter if it's Asian people, doesn't matter if it's Russian people. I mean, the propaganda that the Russians over there has been spewing out for the past 6 months, ever since the war has broken out, has been absolutely asinizing. It has been absolutely, um, mind blowing, heartbreaking to see how various leaders that are in control of these uh, communism, uh, tyranny type governments can actually go in and brainwash, manipulate their people in believing the things that their leaders are telling them. That is a very, very clear example towards how that poisonous Putin has basically brainwashed a great deal of his people in convincing them that what he's embarked into is in fact justifiable. Is in fact justifiable. In the meantime, we got all these other problems that we're dealing with, kind of like somebody juggling more than one ball all over the world pertaining to these catastrophic events that now has caught up with us all at one time. In addition to social media platforms that has obviously or is obviously running its course towards being out of control the way that it is, towards people being able to get on there and spew out whatever they want to spew out, and they have absolutely no grounds of backing up that in which what they're talking about. And it's actually turned into a very, very dangerous three-ring circus that makes me wonder, just like some of the material that's been put out just within the past 12 to 24 hours about Donald Trump having nuclear knowledge about a certain country, that actually is dangerous in the sense towards, okay, if our allies find out that we had been careless with other people's top secret classified materials, are they going to be prone of disconnecting from the American government because now they don't trust us because of our carelessness? Because that's exactly how they're going to look at what the government right now is spewing out pertaining to Donald Trump. They're going to look at that as it being extremely careless, and because of it, they may actually retaliate. And the way that they could retaliate is by saying, you know what? We don't want to have nothing else to do with the Americans. If they can't put a lid on something this secretive to the point that anybody can basically walk out with boxes full of records and take them to their country club, I call it a compound. Then if they can do that, then God only knows who's already got these delicate, secret, top secret, classified information in finding out things about other countries because of us being careless. It's unheard of that anybody would have done this. And now, like I said, the government is spewing out that these documents was in fact of a nuclear nature, indicating that somebody could have received or gotten a hold of that information that shouldn't have never gotten a hold of that information. And of course, the ones that I'm basically pointing at right now are our enemies, our adversaries. You can call them terrorists, you can call them left-wing extremists. You can call them whatever you want to call them, but we got people that obviously hate us. We got people that wants us destroyed. That, as far as I'm concerned, this event with Donald J. Trump is just adding that much more misery to insult to misery pertaining to our type of unprofessionalism. And that's exactly what it is. It's unprofessionalism, because I still believe that it shouldn't just be Donald Trump on the plank, walking the plank here, but it should be all the Secret Service, that brigade that was selected of being with Secret Service. It should be the security outfit that is over the secured areas in the White House, on the outside as well as the in. And it should be certain members of the government itself that obviously took their eye off the ball towards allowing for these documents to ever be taken out of the White House to begin with. So there's a lot of irregularities here that are very, very dangerous, that if we don't watch, this could very well come back and haunt the American people in areas like we could not even begin to imagine. So whenever people talk about it being dangerous, it's not just dangerous in the sense towards it being related around the atomic nuclear agencies, but it's dangerous in the sense towards, if it did get into the wrong hands, whose hands did it get into? And it's dangerous in the sense towards the people that does trust us now may not trust us due to this stunt. That's how I'm going to put it, a stunt. Because Donald J. Trump knew exactly that what he was doing was illegal, because he was the one that upped the ante towards prosecuting anybody that violated those ethnic rules and mandates. And then him turn around and do just the very thing that he had vowed to punish people for if that occurrence took place. Talk about hypocrisy. Talk about saying one thing and doing the opposite, doing the other. Talking about speaking out of both sides of your mouth at the same time. I don't think you're going to get any worse of a scenario than what they're talking about here pertaining to these sensitive documents that should not have never ever gotten taken out of the White House to begin with.
You'll recognize the group, as many of its members, including founder Stuart Rhodes, have been charged in connection with the January 6th insurrection. The ADL Center on Extremism says it has poured over 38,000 leaked names from the Oath Keepers membership lists. The center says it's identified more than 370 people it believes currently work in law enforcement, more than 100 people it believes are currently in the military, and 81 people across the country who, as of August 8th, are currently holding or running for public office this year. The ADL does note, quote, an individual's inclusion in the Oath Keeper database is not proof they were or are still an Oath Keeper, that they hold or held all or some of Oath Keeper ideology or viewpoints, or that they ever actively participated in Oath Keeper activities. Additionally, some people contacted by the Associated Press say they were briefly members and are no longer affiliated or never paid dues. It's the first week of school for millions of kids across the U.S., so should they mask up? How many have gotten vaccinated? What's the plan for COVID boosters? We'll break it all down. Plus, a Russian official says Vladimir Putin is set to meet with Chinese President Xi after most world leaders have shunned Russia. Details on that meeting ahead.
Which means you.
so you can.
It is the first week of school for so many kids across the country, and a lot of them are heading back to the classroom without mask requirements and other relaxed COVID precautions. But a new layer of protection against COVID is finally available. The booster shot that targets Omicron. Though the boosters are only available for kids 12 and older and adults. Joining me right now is NBC's Cal Perry, who's at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Peter Hotez, pediatrician and chair of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development. So, Cal, we're going to start with you. What are you hearing?
We're going to go forward right here due to the fact of time concerns. Not that our children isn't important, because they're the most important thing in our future, but because there's so many different opinions about COVID and masking, I'm just going to avoid this for right now and go to the next subject matter. I personally have been so let down by our medical industry in
COVID in a significant amount. So here are the things we need to do. First of all, we are profoundly underperforming in all boosters. So if you look at the percentage of adults over 18 who've gotten their booster, it's only about 30%. That booster can be the difference whether or not you get hospitalized for COVID-19 or worse, go into an ICU. So that's message number one. Message number two is we are profoundly underperforming in vaccinating our school children. So the 5 to 11-year-olds, only 30% of 5 to 11-year-olds who've gotten vaccinated. And by the way, only 8% have gotten their booster, whether it's the new booster or the old booster, which we can still give to 5 to 11-year-olds. So we have a long, long way to go to max out our ability to protect both our kids and our school teachers that we're failing to observe. And then when it comes to community levels where there's high transmission, such as parts of Appalachia, we might still want to consider wearing masks. I still think that's prudent. But the bottom line is we are just doing abysmally in terms of convincing Americans to get vaccinated and get their boosters.
Doctor, real quick, because I do want to get to something that's just in here in New York specifically, but an annual COVID vaccine, is that something that we're likely to see?
Yeah, I know the White House came out with that statement yesterday. I think there's a long way to go. I think we still need to know how this brand new booster is performing, whether we're actually getting immunity to BA.5 from this booster. We don't know yet. We don't have algorithms to predict what are going to be the new variants that come along next year. We need to fix that. We need to know whether an annual booster, if we do need another booster, is going to be sufficient, or whether twice a year. So there's still a lot of information that we need before we move forward with that statement. So yes, it's quite possible we'll move to annual boosters, but we don't have the information in hand yet to say that that's a definite way to go.
Okay, and before we let both of you go, here in New York, sources tell WNBC that the governor will announce an end to that years-long mask mandate on mass transit. So do you think this is the right time to make this move? Doctor, that's to you.
Yeah, I think right now community transmission is going down, but it's still pretty high. It's kind of stuck at a plateau. I would not make that move yet until we get it down further. Maybe in another month or so, we might be able to move in that direction.
What I was going to say a while ago is that I, as well as many more other people that I've heard of, is so let down by the medical industry about so many different complex, contradictory statements coming from the professional people that has basically turned this into almost like a circus type atmosphere. Towards one day they say put the mask on, one day they say don't take the mask, one day we're supposed to drink bleach, the next day we're not supposed to drink bleach. I mean, it has really disrupted the confidence that a great deal of people at one time used to have in the medical industry department, that have lost it. They have lost that confidence. They have lost that faith because of the unprofessionalism that so many people has experienced or seen or heard of just within the past couple of years during COVID. And because of it, it's it has created a atmosphere of doubt and uncertainty in and of itself. And of course, anytime you have a group of people that questions the authenticity of what our government officials is telling us towards it being accurate or inaccurate, or towards it being right or not right, it's a very, very dangerous position for any government to be in whenever so many people are scratching their heads towards thinking, now, should I do this or should I not? And believe it or not, I honestly actually say that America has turned cartwheels and somersaults in some ways in how that they have treated their citizens just within the past 2 to 3 years since COVID has hit, because of certain policies that they're now mandating, and pertaining to the stimulus checks and pertaining to all the warnings. So in a way, it's actually a twofold oxymoron, bittersweet type statement that I'm making here. In a way, I can say that the government has done extremely, extremely well in comparison to how other countries have handled this situation pertaining to their citizens. But in another way, looking at it from another perspective, it's like, well, you know what? I can see why people doubt the medical industry because of so much contradicting hypocrisy that has went out, that's told the people one thing and then contradicted that towards telling the people another. And like I said, whenever you're in this state, it is an extreme, dangerous state for any government officials to be in.
I mean, sometimes you got to look at every single letter and number from those senders. Tom Costello, thanks so much.
All right.
Up next, will Ukraine be forced to shut down a nuclear power plant because it's gotten so hard to keep safe?
And of course, I can see the medical industry's side of it too, and their perspective, because they have actually gone beyond the call of duty in a lot of places, especially in your bigger city areas, to the effect that they have turned cartwheels and somersaults. Some of them was working almost 24 hours a day, to the point that they was basically just exacerbated, falling out, fainting, because they didn't have the strength to go on. And how that they have been let down by their government because of the misguided information that was given to people. I mean, I give, I don't know what car manufacturer that it was that was manufacturing those ventilation systems to be sent to various hospitals, that basically they had stopped the assembly line towards making cars, and they started making those medical supplies. I give them 2 thumbs up. There's been some people that has went way, way beyond the pale of normalcy pertaining to what that they have tried to do, including our nurses, including our first responders, including our doctors. They have went way, way beyond the call of duty in their performances just within the past 2 years. Way beyond the call of duty. That's how strange this has really, really been. And the thing about it is, we know by watching TV, first of all, it's not a hoax. All right. Secondly, we can see the damage that it's caused in other countries. And now to topple that off, we got a madman over there shooting missiles all around a nuclear facility. And to top that off, we're being hit by other strands of either COVID or monkeypox or whatever. And plus we're being hit by all these natural catastrophes towards either entirely too hot and too dry or entirely too wet. So everything has basically gotten out of focus, or it's gotten out of the category that we used to call normal, to the point that now this abnormal is becoming our normal. And to be quite honest with you, it's frightening. It's frightening to see what's going on with our children, with our schools. It's frightening to see what's going on with all these different diseases. It's frightening to know that these phenomenon, weather, natural catastrophes are increasing on a day-to-day level. It's frightening towards looking and seeing how that our government has lied to the people. I mean, if you add one frightening experience onto the other frightening experience, I'm going to tell you where it leads. It leads to the very thing that is predicted, and I think it was in Thessalonians, it may be in Philippians, that it talks about men's hearts failing. And of course, whenever it says men's, it's talking about mankind here. All right? It says that in the last days, men's hearts will fail because of fear of things coming up onto the planet. Now, to me, that supports what Jesus taught. For Jesus said to pray that you're worthy to escape these things, or you are strong enough to endure these things, indicating that these things are going to be bombarding us in the last days. And it also verifies the fact that in the last days, we will see these phenomenon events.
India and Russia's envoy to Beijing, who told reporters this morning that the two will meet in a summit in Uzbekistan next Thursday and Friday. The Associated Press reports that will happen during a political, economic, and security forum that China and Russia dominate. The news comes a day after NBC News learned Russia is purchasing artillery from North Korea on top of drones from Iran. Meanwhile, Russia is now responding after inspectors with the UN's nuclear watchdog agency called for a security zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and that Russian shelling be stopped immediately in a report released yesterday. NBC's Megan Fitzgerald joins me now from Kyiv with more on this. So, Megan, what is Russia saying this morning about the nuclear facility?
Well, Lindsay, according to a Russian media outlet, Interfax, they're saying that the Russians want more clarification about this report. And of course, Russia continues to blame Ukraine for the shelling. But look, this UN watchdog report that just came out yesterday is a result of those inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency being allowed inside the facility to do a good assessment. And what we learned is why we continue to hear these things like the nuclear plant is heading for this nuclear disaster. They're saying that the plant has violated the 7 pillars of nuclear safety. So we're talking about things like the physical integrity, the structural integrity of this plant, that the safety and security systems aren't fully functioning. The staff is under undue pressure. Also, that this off-site power source is not sufficient. So a lot of concerns there. But look, we've heard from the Director General of the IAEA for several weeks now, calling on the Russians to demilitarize this plant, calling on the shelling to stop. And what we've seen is neither of those things have happened. And so earlier today, Ukrainian energy officials saying that they are considering shutting the entire plant down. They believe that that might be a safer option than having the plant be in a position where it needs to use these backup diesel-run generators. But look, this is a risky and very concerning move because keep in mind, we're talking about some 4 million Ukrainians that depend on this plant for power, Lindsay.
All right, Megan Fitzgerald, thanks so much for bringing us that update. Appreciate it. And this Friday, Richard Engel will report on the ground from Ukraine. On assignment, Ukraine, the Search for Justice airs Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on MSNBC. That does it for me this busy hour. Andrea Mitchell Reports starts next.
So what they just got through saying and ending, they're in a damned if they do and damned if they don't type scenario, in the degree towards if they keep the plant going, they're going to take a strong chance on something really happening that is going to be devastating in people's lives towards radiation poisoning. But if they shut the plant down, then that's going to affect the Ukrainians pertaining to the energy that they get from that facility, and it just exacerbates one problem into another problem into another problem. And this is all in the hand of Putin, because Putin didn't have to go at this the way that he went at this. He done already went at this one time. I think it was in 2014, something like that he had done already tried to show the Ukrainians some other kind of destructionable point of view. But he has now waited till now. And of course, he lied to just about everybody, the Russians did, by telling everybody, oh, no, we're just doing this. This is just exercise. This is just exercise. Right? Exercise? You're going to send this many troops and this many tanks, and you're going to use up this type of labor and fuel just over an exercise? No. He was planning for an invasion that even I, myself, seen. I'm going to say probably 30 days before the invasion, there was finally people in our government that was verifying the things that I was verifying towards it's going to be an invasion. And the sad thing about it, my son was convinced that I was off key. Even Davinsky, or whatever his name is, the president of the Ukrainian people, he himself had been convinced that it was strictly just an exercise up until the last 24 to 48 hours, and that's whenever it finally dawned on, reality finally dawned on him, oh my God, this is not just an exercise, this is actually going to be a hardcore invasion. And that's exactly what Putin was doing. And I knew it. And I tried to put out the information to the American people in exposing that. But once more, it got ignored, like some of the other materials that I put out to the general public towards it being ignored. So that's where we are today in exchange towards all these catastrophes. That one catastrophe just exacerbates another catastrophe that creates another catastrophe, and it's snowballing. It's getting worse. Well, once more, the people in Northwest Tennessee and the surrounding areas, obviously, they did not want to support a ministry that supported global, international unity and peace. Because if they did, I feel like by now, somebody would have already stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, Dennis, we didn't just fail you, but we failed God, because we realize now that God, it had to be God that was instructing you, and it had to be God that was telling you these things, because there's no other way possible that you could have been on target in identifying these problems unless God was actually leading you in the direction towards telling you these things. Well, I could have told him that. I could have told him that again and again and again, that my message was authentic. But you still got people around here that don't believe it.
New details about what was uncovered in the FBI search of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home last month. The Washington Post, citing people familiar with the matter, reporting that documents detailing a foreign government's military defenses and nuclear capabilities were found by agents during that August search. The highly sensitive documents are reportedly so closely guarded that many senior national security officials are kept in the dark about them. Former Trump White House strategist Steve Bannon, currently awaiting sentencing after being convicted on 2 counts of contempt of Congress, is now reacting to another Washington Post report that he'll turn himself in to New York investigators tomorrow, facing a new state criminal indictment. Bannon telling NBC News overnight that state prosecutors in New York are engaging in, quote, political weaponization of the criminal justice system. Also this hour, we're going to take a deeper dive into the impact the Supreme Court's abortion decision could have on the November midterms, Roe-vember, some are calling it, as congressional Democrats grow more optimistic about their chances to hold the majorities. And next hour, former President Barack Obama returns to the White House, joined by Michelle Obama, her first trip back to the White House since she left there in 2017. It is the official unveiling of their White House portraits. But we begin this hour with NBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian, former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, and Tracy Waldner, a former FBI special agent and a former CIA officer. Ken, to you out of the gates here, this clearly is a significant development. Walk us through what new we are learning.
Well, Peter, the Post is saying that there was a document taken out of Mar-a-Lago that referenced
a country's nuclear defense capabilities. The Post is not saying whether that document was classified. So that's an important caveat. No criticism of the Post. These are hard details to learn. So it's hard to know just from this article how significant this document actually is. I mean, there are think tank reports that discuss a country's nuclear defenses, and then there are super highly classified sensitive documents. We don't know which this is. The Post story also goes into what we already knew about the sensitivity of the documents, the other documents that were taken from Mar-a-Lago. We knew as of a couple of weeks ago that some of those documents were marked top secret SCI and special access program. That's a designation for a really secret program known only to a handful of people, often inside the U.S. government, created by a handful of cabinet secretaries. Really, really restrictive stuff. It's not clear whether this particular nuclear document came under that category, but it is clear that there were some very, very sensitive documents taken from Mar-a-Lago, Peter. Tracy, I want to get to the reaction from Trump's allies in a moment, but first, these documents are kept under lock and key. Only a very limited number of people are allowed to access them or frankly even know that they exist. How concerning is a finding like this to the intelligence community?
So it's extremely concerning. When I worked at the CIA, I worked on 2 special access programs, and just to give everyone an idea of what those look like, you do work inside of a SCIF, and then inside of that SCIF is another SCIF.
Tell us what a SCIF is, Tracy, just for clarity, because I know and you know, but I want folks to recognize the depth, the lengths that y'all go in the intelligence community to protect these documents.
Sure. A SCIF is a special compartmented information facility, and at CIA, really most people work in one, and it's basically a vault. You cannot go in there with your cell phone, any kind of electronic device whatsoever, and information when it leaves a SCIF is typically checked in and out, and there's a courier who takes it. But when you get into a special access program, there is that sort of main SCIF that you walk into, and then an even smaller SCIF. And the people who walk into that SCIF have to manually sign in and out each day and I had to account for really everywhere I was within that building and when I was inside and outside of the facility. And even though my purse did not contain any electronic devices whatsoever, that purse had to actually be left in that outer SCIF. And the program still is classified today, but that is how seriously we take special access programs, particularly at the CIA.
So let me walk folks through what the Trump spokesperson is saying about this. He tweeted, quote, "The Washington Post continues to serve as the propaganda arm of the Biden administration, and instead of operating openly and honestly, they collude in never-ending leaks and lies at the expense of the integrity of the FBI and the DOJ." Paul, to you here, if this reporting is true, legally speaking, how does this impact the case against the former president?
In 2 significant ways, Peter. First, let's pay attention for a moment to the search warrant. It means that the government really was left with absolutely no option other than to go to Mar-a-Lago, gather these documents, and place them in a secure location. Once they had issued that grand jury subpoena, once the Trump team was compelled to disclose all classified information in their possession, and once the Department of Justice learned that the Trump team had not complied with that lawful order, what other alternative was left with them? That is especially so if this information relates to nuclear capabilities of another nation and their defenses. Second, Peter, what I point to is that every single prosecutor who reviews evidence of a case constantly has in the front of mind how it is that evidence is going to be received by a jury. Because as you know, Peter, juries are made up of many different people, divergent beliefs, many different backgrounds. What is the compelling piece of evidence that you can consider putting before that jury that would make a prosecution more likely and a conviction more likely as well? Here, if the evidence relates to classified information regarding the maintaining of nuclear secrets, the likelihood that criminal charges will eventually be brought and the likelihood that there will be an eventual conviction is now greatly increased, Peter.
Tracy, let me ask you, if I can, as you know well, there are only 9 nuclear powers in the world. How does this impact the relationship with those countries? Adversaries like Russia, if it's information about them, or allies like Israel?
I think this tremendously impacts really our relationship with our allies. I think, we know who our enemies are, and we know that we have strained relationships with them already. However, countries like Israel, Great Britain, France, who are our allies, I want folks to understand, we could not have stopped a lot of terrorist attacks and some very nefarious operations if we did not have the cooperation of some of these foreign countries. And it's incredibly important that we maintain these relationships with them. And right now, I think those relationships are really sort of hanging on by a thread, because I don't blame them for not trusting us to hold on to their nuclear secrets or human secrets, carefully.
Especially if you consider the fact that the former president is considering a presidential run again. He may be the one who had access to this information, even if those allies view it as safe right now under the current administration. Ken Delaney and Paul Charlton, Tracy Waldner, we appreciate all you guys being with us right here. Joining us now is Bill Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense during the Clinton administration. Mr. Secretary, just out of the gates, I want your reaction to this reporting from the Washington Post that some of these documents recovered describe nuclear capabilities of foreign nations, again, so sensitive only a select group within the government could see them.
Well, I think we tend to forget just how important guarding these secrets, especially pertaining to nuclear weapons, really is. It is stunning that this kind of information would be in the private possession of a former president. I can't recall any other example in my experience in politics, to be sure, where we've ever had a president take that kind of information into his personal possession and not have it strictly guarded by official agencies. It's just unprecedented, and I think it is. To follow up on the question you asked, Peter, just a moment ago, our allies will have less trust in us to the extent they believe that we are not conscious of the necessity of keeping this tightly secured. They will not share that information. Secondly, we might be gathering information even unbeknownst to them. And that would lend itself once again to less trust. So trust is the coin of the realm as far as dealing with our allies. And as far as our allies are concerned, we pay billions of dollars in order to gather as much information as we can about the capabilities of our adversaries.
And Secretary Cohen, you were formerly the defense secretary. You weren't president, but you were high up as it goes in terms of access to this sort of classified information. What would have happened to you, for example, if you were found to have had similar top secret documents at your home unprotected?
Guantanamo Bay.
At the time, I certainly would have been called to task. I don't recall ever having a classified document in my apartment in Washington. Every time I had access to information, there was someone there with a satchel to make sure that once I read it, they took it back and took it to the Pentagon. If I were to have taken information unbeknownst to the apartment and kept it as my private preserve, I certainly could have been charged with a crime and certainly deprived of my position as Secretary of Defense. So I think everyone in the department takes it very seriously, as those in the CIA, DIA, and every intelligence agency that we have.
So, Mr. Secretary, pull back the curtain for us, if you would, for a second. What types of conversations, discussions are happening right now with those highest levels of our national security agencies, that community right now, based on this new information about what was seized from Mar-a-Lago, considering what the reporting is? I mean, what do they do now to sort of protect the potential fallout of this information having been in the hands of a former president unprotected?
They have to do a damage assessment. They have to try to understand where this information was, where the documents were, who had access to them, were cleaning personnel or other type of service employees at Mar-a-Lago. Did they have access? Did they have
Mr. Cohen, or Secretary Cohen, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, the truth is we've had reporting in the past about other foreign agencies, other foreign spies trying to get access to Mar-a-Lago. We're not speaking in a vacuum here, right? They recognize that access to the former president would potentially provide them to information that they could use to try to, I don't know, to try to do something that would further compromise the United States in the future.
Absolutely. We have to be worried about foreign adversaries trying to get access to it, but they could get access not through their nationals, but through our own, or people who have they've been compromised working at Mar-a-Lago. So we don't know. That's what the damage assessment is going to be now in terms of how much, who had access, how many were read, what did the president say to other people. There are some apparently folders that are empty but marked in a classified form from either top secret or confidential. I don't know, and we don't know, and we'll not know until the intelligence community makes an assessment of who saw it. Did the president say anything to anybody else? How do we know that? So tracking it down and doing an assessment of where it went, or possibly, and then advising our own folks of the damage, and then contacting our allies if we've compromised their integrity or their intelligence as well.
Mr. Secretary, while we have you here, I want to ask you about another topic we're discussing here, of course, at MSNBC. Is what's happening in Ukraine right now, where their nuclear inspector says that they are considering a shutdown of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant's power unit if, quote, appropriate conditions arise. This clearly could have a major impact on Ukraine and surrounding countries. Your view on the situation there, as this power plant, frankly, is kind of become at the center of this awful war now in its 7th month.
This is not surprising to me. I think President Putin will not stop at any opportunity to exert leverage over Ukraine and the Western world. During the Kosovo campaign, we found that the Serbs would place their tanks up against private homes, so that we had difficulty in targeting their tanks because we'd kill innocent civilians. This is the same thing on a much more massive scale. To the notion they'd put their personnel or their equipment up against that nuclear plant, daring the Ukrainians to attack it and therefore spread disaster over the region. It's not something that's not in the playbook of President Putin.
Former Defense Secretary William Cohen, we appreciate your expertise and your time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Peter.
Let's listen to that one more time and what he just said. Stop right there.
Tanks up against private homes, so that we had difficulty in targeting their tanks because we'd kill innocent civilians. This is the same thing on a much more massive scale. To the notion they'd put their personnel or their equipment up against that nuclear plant, daring the Ukrainians to attack it and therefore spread disaster over the region. It's not something that's not in the playbook of President Putin. And therefore spread disaster over the region. It's not something that's not in the playbook of President Putin. Disaster over the region. It's not something that's not in the playbook of President Putin.
Wow. Between the secret documents, classified, top-notch, top secret, and between all the above, this has become a very, very complex, dangerous situation. That's the reason why every time I make a film, every time I do a stream, every time I put out something on my YouTube or Facebook platform, we always say, thank you for your prayers. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless America's troops. God bless America's endeavors. And we say thank you for all your concerns and shalom. And we mean that because we know how critical that this time either is or is soon to be involving in these end time events that are only unraveling and accelerating in devastating areas that I don't even think the brightest of the brightest minds could have ever thought that we would be where we are right now, pertaining to various issues that has been raised up on various seriousness platforms that is only accelerating even as I make this particular video. None of this is good. None of this is good. And I tried to say a while ago the very same thing that they was talking about as far as trust issues with our allies. We think we know who our enemies are. We believe we know who our enemies are. But in actuality, do we really know who our adversaries are? I mean, you got so many people out there that has been playing the game, burning the candle at both ends, speaking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. It's got to the point you don't know who to believe or believe anybody, regardless whether it be the Americans or poisonous Putin that said what he said before he invaded Ukraine, or believe some other official in some other country pertaining to what's going on. I think that the UK has finally wisened up, and Germany and places around there has finally wisened up pertaining to these last day scenario events, that their energy is going to become extremely expensive this winter. That could be detrimental for a great deal of people towards either not being able to afford to keep their homes warm, or they just fall through the cracks. I don't know if maybe some of those countries over there should be considering warm centers, similar towards how we have been developing for the past few years as far as cooling centers, and I think that they have started that now over in Europe and over in Australia and places like that where it's been getting so hot. We had to invent something to help the people, and of course most of your cooling centers are basically just fountains of water or air conditioning coliseums or whatever, but they're going to have to think more on a line towards warming centers if they're going to keep their people alive without mass casualties occurring because of freezing to death. Good luck to all of us as we end our program all the time, and shalom.